This is Tom Fox, and welcome to a new season of Adventures in Compliance. This season, we're going to take up the stories from the collection entitled His Last Beau, some reminiscences of Sherlock Holmes, which is a 1917 collection of previously published Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle, including the titular short story, His Last Beau, the War Service of Sherlock Holmes. The collection's first edition adjusts the anthology subtitle to some later remembrances of Holmes. All of the editions contain a brief preface from Dr. Watson, which we will read in a little bit. The book itself, or the collection, was published by John Murray in October 1917 and in the U.S. by George R. Doran the same year. The collection contains the adventure of the cardboard box, which was included in the American first edition of the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, but dropped later. 6 of the stories were published in the Strand between 1608 and December 1913. His final story, His Last Beau, the War Service of Sherlock Holmes, is an epilogue about Holmes' war service and was first published in Collier's on September 22nd, 1917, one book before the book's premiere. There are some great stories in here, and I know you will enjoy them, and I hope you will enjoy this season of Adventures in Compliance really as much as I've enjoyed reading the stories. If you've enjoyed this series or enjoy Sherlock Holmes, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever great podcasts are listened to. Adventures in Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Today we take up one of Holmes' lesser-known stories, The Adventure of the Dying Detective. We're going to have a quick word from our network sponsor, Ethico, then we'll be right back.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, The ROI of Compliance, and to try our free ROI calculator. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
This story begins ominously as Dr. Watson is called to tend to Sherlock Holmes, who is apparently dying of a rare tropical disease contracted while he was on a case. Watson is shocked, not having heard about his friend's illness. Mrs. Hudson says Holmes has neither eaten nor drank anything for 3 days. Holmes instructs Watson not to come near him because the illness is highly infectious. In fact, he scorns to be treated by Watson and insults Watson and his abilities, astonishing and even hurting his good friend, the doctor. Although Watson wishes to examine Holmes himself or call in a specialist, Holmes demands that Watson wait several hours before seeking help. While Watson waits, he examines several objects in Holmes' rooms, as Holmes grows angry when Watson touches a small ivory box, ordering Watson to put it down. And finally, at 6 o'clock, Holmes tells Watson to turn the gas light on, but only half full. He then instructs Watson to bring Mr. Culverton Smith of 13 Lower Burke Street to see Holmes and make sure that Watson returns to Baker Street before Smith arrives. Watson goes to Smith's address, although Smith refuses to see anyone, and Watson forces his way in. Once Watson explains his errand, Smith's attitude changes dramatically. Smith agrees to come to Baker Street within the half hour. Watson excuses himself, saying that he has another appointment and returns to Baker Street before Smith's arrival. Believing they are alone, Smith is frank with Holmes. It emerges to Watson's terror that Holmes has been sickened by the same illness that killed Smith's nephew, Victor Strange. Smith then sees the little ivory box, which he sent to Holmes by post, which contains a sharp spring infected with the illness. Smith pockets it, removing the evidence of his crime, then resolves to stay there and watch Holmes die. Holmes asks Smith to turn the gas up full, which Smith does. Smith then asks Holmes if he would like anything else, to which Holmes replies, no longer in the voice of a man near death, a match and a cigarette. Inspector Morton then enters, as the full gas light was a signal for him to move in. Holmes tells Morton to arrest Culverton Smith for the murder of his nephew and perhaps for the attempted murder of Sherlock Holmes. Smith points out that his word is as good as Holmes in court, but Holmes then calls for Watson to emerge from behind the screen to present himself as another witness for the prosecution. Holmes explained his illness was feigned as a ruse to induce Smith to confess his nephew's murder. Holmes was not infected by the little box. He has enough enemies to know that he must always examine his meal carefully before he opens it. Starving himself for 3 days and the claim of the disease infectious nature were to keep Watson from examining him and discovering this ruse, since, as he clarifies, he has respect for his good friend's medical skills and abilities. I thought I would use the story of the dying detective to explore pattern recognition from the compliance angle. The story demonstrates Holmes' ability to recognize and interpret patterns even under the guise of being gravely ill, but I think the story offers several lessons that are highly applicable to the world of compliance. Number one, attention to detail. Holmes notices details that others overlook. Even while feigning illness, he observes and analyzes the behavior of others, particularly the villain, Culverton Smith. For compliance professionals, the lesson is clear. Small details can be crucial. Minor discrepancies in data or behavior might reveal larger issues. You should always be vigilant and question the significance of what might seem like trivial details. Regularly perform audits and review documentation, transactions, and communications to catch discrepancies early. Use checklists to ensure thorough review. Next up, building a narrative from patterns. Holmes constructs a narrative from the patterns he observed, both in Smith's past behavior and in the current situation. For compliance professionals, it's important to weave together various pieces of information to create a coherent picture, whether it's transactional data, audit findings, or employee actions. The ability to build a narrative from the patterns is key to identifying potential compliance issues they might indicate or facilitate. When faced with potential compliance issues, you should look at this from multiple angles. Obviously, a root cause analysis can be a key element for you as well. Number three, understanding human behavior. Holmes expertly manipulates Culverton Smith by pretending to be on his deathbed. Understanding the villain's curiosity and ego would lead him to reveal his crime. In compliance, understanding the motivations and behaviors of others can help in identifying and mitigating risks. Recognizing patterns in how people behave under certain circumstances can lead to better predictions and prevention of noncompliance. Here we have the fraud triangle and, of course, Jonathan Mark's fraud pentagon to help us as well. So there are places you can go for determining the context of how people will behave, and you should monitor employee communications behaviors for sign of noncompliance and implement data analytics to detect unusual transactions. Patience and timing, that's not really something we talk about enough in compliance, but Holmes shows immense patience waiting for the right moment to confront Culverton Smith. In compliance, timing can be critical. Recognizing a pattern is just the first step. Knowing when and how to act on that recognition is equally important. Acting too soon or too late can lead to missed opportunities or unnecessary complications going forward. Next, staying one step ahead. Holmes always stays ahead of his adversary by anticipating their actions. In compliance, staying ahead of potential issues by recognizing patterns before they can fully develop can be the difference between preventing a problem and having to deal with a full-blown crisis. Developing investigative frameworks can be critical. For instance, if a particular department shows high risk, investigate specific processes and gather feedback to confirm or refute. Obviously, persistence is also a part of this, and cultivating a culture where compliance can be seen as an ongoing commitment, encouraging teams to report potential issues without fear of retribution, and ensuring they understand the importance of the validity of the investigation. Indeed, The Dying Detective is a masterclass in pattern recognition, where Holmes' ability to see beyond the obvious leads to the unmasking of a clever criminal. For those in compliance, adopting a similar approach, focused on detail, behavior, narrative, timing, testing, and foresight, can greatly enhance your ability as a compliance professional to recognizing and responding to risks before they become full-blown compliance violations. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this short story in the newest season of In Adventures in Compliance, where we look at Sherlock Holmes' The Last Bow. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. I also hope that you will take the opportunity to review some of your favorite Sherlock Holmes stories. And if you'd like to talk about them or talk about the role of Holmes and compliance, I'd love to have a podcast with you. So reach out to me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. The award-winning Adventures in Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.